Hi everyone, in this video I'll be going over some common writing errors and a bit more advanced APA formatting that may be useful for your papers. All right, so let's start with writing, a few things to watch out for. One really common thing that I see a lot is repetitive author introductions. And so this involves embedding the author's name within the sentence. This is really not as common in APA writing as parenthetical citations, the one where you have it in parentheses. It's useful in some cases, but it tends to be used a lot more than it should be in graduate writing. And so you can see this example here where Smith 2017 keeps being used. I would recommend that you reserve this type of embedding within your narrative, your in-text citations, for studies that you're going to be discussing in depth. So if you're going to be talking about a given study for like an entire paragraph, for example, then you can introduce it this way. If you're just using the study as an example or to defend a point that you've made, parenthetical citations is usually more than enough. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say about that. Okay, so this would be an alternative to that repeated introduction of Smith 2017. So exposure to trauma was associated with higher self-reported ratings of anxiety among a national sample of adolescent females. And then your parenthetical citation. Okay, reads a lot better, less wordy than this one here. And it also removes some of the unprofessional language, like talks about, has found that, like that kind of thing that just isn't really helpful. Okay, another big issue is implying causation with your writing. So most of the studies that you're going to be citing for your paper are not true experiments, which means that they can't imply causation. They can't say that this thing causes this thing. So like in that first one, experiencing developmental transitions in young adulthood can cause depressive disorders. Unless that was a true experiment where they had one group randomly assigned to the transition group and another one randomly assigned to the not transition group, you can't say that it causes it, right? That's incorrect. So you want to avoid these definitive statements and causal language. Instead, you can use words like may be associated with, could imply that, there's a correlation between. You could also use effect language, like there's a direct effect or an indirect effect, or this suggests that, and so on and so on. And always remember to cite. So these here don't have citations. So be careful with using the word cause, or even things like leads to can be problematic. So these would be better examples. The developmental transitions occurring in young adulthood are associated with an increased likelihood of experiencing depression. And this would be more accurate with what the author has said. And then the second one, living in a single parent household is positively correlated with depression and hopelessness in adolescent children, as opposed to saying living in a single parent household causes depression or depression and hopelessness. Okay. Okay, another common thing that I see a lot is using questions to make a point. And this usually happens when you don't really know how to say something or you don't know how to start a paragraph. And so you'll use a question like, what is the most common cause of depression? And then you'll go to describe it. Just cut that part out and just go describe it. So this sentence here, this research poses questions like, what is the main contributor to child abuse? And who's more likely to experience child abuse? And what can be done to reduce the likelihood of child abuse? This doesn't really give any information at all, and it isn't really used that commonly. When it's used, it's in an introductory paragraph or when giving the research questions of the study specifically, which you won't have in your paper. And it does really keep you from being direct. It's just not needed. So you can get straight to the point. And you can see an example here. Research examining the etiology of child abuse, that should say its prevalence among different populations and effective means of reducing its likelihood is of unique importance to the clinical field. Something like that. Get straight to it. Don't give the questions. Another issue is excessive use of direct quotations. I've said this a couple times before. Remember that direct quotations are used really sparingly in psychological writing. It's best to paraphrase in your own words and only save quotations for very important ideas or for terms that you're going to use that are directly quoted from an article. A quotation is not a catch-all for when you don't want to put time into paraphrasing, or more commonly, when you don't understand the sentence enough to paraphrase it. If you don't understand it, ask for help with clarifying it, ask me for help, or don't use it, right? So try to turn these into language that is paraphrased instead of a direct quotation. And so here, this is a common thing that I'll see. All CBT treatments feature similar components, including in vivo exposure, yada, 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 yada. This is exactly a direct quotation from the author, which is unnecessary. And you could turn it into something like this instead. The majority of CBT interventions include components that address maladaptive cognitions, dysfunctional behaviors, and negative emotions. Citation, common techniques include, describe it, citation. Okay, so paraphrase wins quotation. Another issue, and this is one that I struggle with myself, is wordiness and fluff. And I got this example from APA Style Blog, which I absolutely love and is a great resource for you. So avoid phrases that talk about the facts. Instead, use because or although. And so here's an example of what you want to avoid. Due to the fact that the measure was unavailable, I selected another. In spite of the fact that half of the participants dropped out of the study, we still conducted phase 2. Don't get the fact out of there. Okay, so be more concise. Because the measure was unavailable, I selected another. Although half the participants dropped out of the study, we still conducted phase 2. All right. Oh, another thing to avoid with fluffiness is phrases involving purpose and order. So for example, we administered surveys for the purpose of assessing motivation, or we designed the study in order to investigate different aspects of personality. I will say I use in order to way more than I should, so it's common, but this is better. We administered surveys to assess motivation, straight to the point. We designed the study to investigate different aspects of personality. All right, and then I think this is the last one for wordiness, phrases involving importance and interestingness. You don't have to express that it's important to note this or that it's interesting to note this. That's just not necessary. So you could say something instead like this. Our study has important implications for counseling practices, results diverged from the hypothesis, and so on. Okay, another reminder here is about passive voice, and this example is also from APA Style Blog, and I think it's great. There's an example here, the lion ate the mouse would be active, right? Versus the mouse was eaten by the lion, which would be passive. The mouse was eaten. It just sat there while it was eaten, as opposed to the lion is acting. It ate the mouse. All right, so now we'll transition a little bit from writing stuff to APA formatting and a couple of things to watch out for and a couple reminders. This one's a reminder with punctuation when you're using parenthetical citations. Remember that you need to have your punctuation after the closing parentheses. So if you look at this one, the the parenthetical citation is just hanging there. It doesn't have relevant citations on it. And so this is problematic. We don't want to do that. You see, it's just there, and then your next sentence starts, and that's not going to be okay. Oops. All right. Instead, you would write it like this. You have your citation attached to the sentence where it belongs, and then the period goes at the end of the closing citation. Okay. This is a reminder on headings. We did headings in a separate lecture, but just a reminder of your headings and some examples with cheese, because I like cheese. So there's some examples for you. All right, another issue that comes up a lot is how to correctly do a reference for a website, okay? And an issue is when you're trying to extract the DOI, if you're accessing something from the Mounts research databases, the DOI will often come out like this at the bottom, the HTTP one that has the msmc.idm and so on. You don't want to include all of that. So you can just extract the DOI number from that, like I've shown there. Highlighting, a lot of times when you're copy pasting a citation from a research database into your paper, which I've got feelings about that. Make sure that it's correct. I think a lot of folks will use the citations without checking them and then they're wrong. Make sure it's correct, but if you want to use it, it's fine. Just make sure it's correct. But then the other issue is you won't, a lot of students won't remove the highlighting. When you copy from those research databases and put them into your paper, it highlights it in gray, like this weird like gray shading. And it's visible, like it's not like you can't see it. So make sure to remove that highlighting because there's not supposed to be any highlighting in the APA reference list. Another issue that you may encounter is the journal name being condensed in a reference that you're copying from somewhere, or even on the article itself. So you need to find the full name of the journal article. You can't use the abbreviation. So there's an example here. The incorrect version would be Child Adult Psych Pharm. The actual full name of that journal is the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology, and that's what you need to include in your reference. So if you see something that looks like an abbreviation like this, just copy it and plug it into Google or your, search engine of choice, and it'll give you the full name. Okay. All right, and now the last piece of this is about citing and referencing online sources. So websites, as I mentioned, is one that can be problematic to cite. If you're citing a website, this is what it should look like, okay? And you do need to include where you got it from. If you're citing Twitter, it's kind of a complicated citation, but this is what it should look like, okay? So I would recommend pulling this slide out if you're gonna end up citing Twitter so that you know how to do it correctly. Same thing, Facebook status update can also be cited if you're wanting to cite it and reference it in your reference list. Here's how you would do that. And you do need to write the actual update up to the first 40 words. So it can be kind of long. A social media video or a YouTube video can also be included as a citation or as a reference. And so this is how you would do that. And you can also include Instagram posts. Okay, and I've shown you here where you would get all of the information that you need in order to do that reference and citation correctly. This is what you would then turn it into. So you get the information here and then plug it in here. And that is that. Okay, so a little bit more advanced APA for you. You may not need a lot of it, but if you end up needing it during for your paper, you know where to find it. It's also in your APA handbook. So don't hesitate to look back at that or to check in with me if you have questions. All right, thanks everybody.